Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this Monday morning, which could be a holiday for some of you, depending on what schools you're at. So thank you for joining. I'm really excited to present this webinar because I really wanted to talk a little bit from the end of if you're beginning with ExamSoft or you're thinking about using ExamSoft, how can you gain buy-in? Because we know that that is extremely important when we are making any type of change. And I feel that, at least when I started this process of over 5 years ago, with this transition into ExamSoft, I feel like I had a lot of people asking me, well, what's in it for me? This is going to be a huge change. This is extra work for me. So what will I actually get out of the program? And so what I want to do is look at this from 3 different angles, as far as the student, the faculty, and then our curriculums as a whole. What do we really get out of using the ExamSoft product? So as I mentioned, change is very, very difficult. A lot of us just prefer not to change at all, but we know that if we're not changing, then we are definitely falling behind. And so I want to present some things today on why the student, the faculty, and the curriculum should actually be excited about this change if you are looking to implement ExamSoft, or you're already using ExamSoft, and we're going to talk about some features today that maybe you didn't know were there. So again, I think there's really benefits for the students when it comes to ExamSoft, even though it could be a change for them. Maybe they were using a different platform, or maybe even using paper and pencil before ExamSoft. It is a big change, but there's a lot of benefits directly to the student, who is the end user. And then for faculty, I know we see it as a lot of extra work. And I did as well, honestly. I knew that this was going to take quite a bit of my time to implement a new process. But as a faculty member, things actually sped up my day when it came to ExamSoft. I found out that some of the features I could be using would actually make my life a whole lot easier. So I want to present some of those benefits to you, so maybe you can share those with your faculty. And then lastly, the curriculum. So I know our curriculum can't talk, and our curriculum can't actually say what's in it for me, but maybe it's your curriculum committee, or maybe it's administration, but someone who's asking you questions about what will this really do to enhance our program. And so I want to look at that bigger picture of how ExamSoft will influence your curriculum and teaching and learning. So really our goals for today are to explore some of those benefits to those 3 different groups, as we mentioned, but also to examine some of the reports that will be really helpful for students and faculty. Mitch, if you can, maybe give control back to me. I think it just took control away from me. So if you don't mind giving that back, and we'll go back 1 slide. There we go. It looks like I have control back again. Maybe not, Mitch. I think you still have control. Sorry about that. Okay. So we're going to look at some of the reports that are really helpful to students and faculty, but then also we'll look at some of the mapping data, and I have some example data that we'll look at to see what this bigger, broader curriculum view could look like. And then hopefully you're going to discover a few new features today that you did not realize were in ExamSoft. So we're going to start from the student perspective first, of really what's in it for them. And first, I would present ExamSoft as being a reliable test-taking platform to our students. They can trust that the software is going to do what it says, that it's not going to lose their answers. It's going to be a very secure and reliable way that they can take their exams and get their scores back. But also they can expect it to be an electronic testing platform, which if your students go on to take some sort of licensing exam, maybe after school, or some sort of certification afterwards, it's likely going to be an electronic testing platform there. And so if students have previously been using paper and pencil, moving to this electronic testing platform will help them to get prepared for whatever that test might be that's coming in an electronic format. You can have unbiased grading from faculty when it comes to an electronic test-taking platform, because you're able to blind responses if you're looking at fill in the blank or essay questions, so that students can trust that it is unbiased grading. And then also, my students love that they get a really fast grade release afterwards. Now, of course, this is dependent on the faculty member who's actually grading and releasing the scores, but it is a whole lot faster than paper and pencil as far as grading goes, because it's just so fast and we can turn around the grades to students pretty quickly. Next, students are going to receive feedback that they really haven't received before. At least that was true with our students. Typically, students just received their score, a percentage score. We might also provide the class average so they could see if they are above, below, or at the class average. But for the most part, we weren't able to provide the level of feedback to our students that we can now give to them. So a couple of things that students just really love about ExamSoft, or at least this is my students, is they love being able to highlight, especially on long cases. They love this electronic format because they can highlight things that they want to draw their attention to with multiple colors. They can mark out the answer choices that they don't think are correct and maybe come back to it later, and not have to think through the whole process again. They'll already have their answers narrowed down. They love just flagging questions, zooming, the timed reminders that are present. Notes and feedback we're going to talk a little bit more about in another section, but this is where students can really have an electronic scratch pad and even mark if they want to provide what they've written to the instructor for me to see their feedback. Of course, our students like being able to use multiple devices, so we allow students to use their laptops or an iPad, and they really like that modality. And then, of course, their report cards afterwards are probably the favorite thing when it comes to the ExamSoft software. So this is what students tell me that they love. So let's dive in a little bit more into what these report cards look like. And this is just an example report card, and we're going to zoom into each piece, but of course this is what it looks like overall. So let's zoom in just to the top there. The students now receive their score in addition to the class average, so they can immediately see where they stand with the rest of their class. And that's previously what had been given to students, but it's this next part that is really, really cool that the students love, and that is these report cards here. So I'm going to blow up this area just a little bit more so that you can see it bigger in case you haven't looked at one of these reports before. But this is a strengths and opportunities report. So this student, particularly, we are looking at Bloom's taxonomy. So at our school, we divide Bloom's taxonomy into 3 levels or 3 dimensions instead of the full 6 levels of Bloom's taxonomy. And so what we do is the dimension 1 would be just a basic recall type question. So it's a memorization. It really doesn't take any steps to get to the right answer. You just know it or you don't know it. Dimension 2 would be, it requires that basic recall, but they have to make 1 step of application or pulling information together. And then that dimension 3 would be that critical thinking level type question. So it requires the students not only to have some basic recall, but it's going to take multiple steps, at least 2 steps of application to get to that correct answer. So what this student can now see is the star, the dark blue star, is their score. So you can see in dimension 1, they had an 86 average on all of those dimension 1 categories. Even though that's still below the class average of a 90, they were still doing okay in that category. But you can see with dimension 2, their score goes down a bit. They're only getting about 75% of those questions right, but that is closer to the class average of a 73. It's actually above the class average of a 73. And then that last step, that's really where they need work on. So the dimension 3, or those critical thinking questions, are really what they are not doing well. And so that really helps them know how to study. It's not that they can't memorize. because they're getting those questions correct. It's really the application. And so they would study differently, knowing that they can't apply the information that they're memorizing. So we do it, we categorize based on Bloom's, but we also categorize based on my course learning objectives. So I teach in a pharmacology course, and so you can see these are our course learning objectives, that students know adverse effects, mechanism of action, how to monitor for the drugs. And you can see that this student very quickly could go through, and using the red, yellow, and green light indicators that are all the way on the right, this student needs to work on drug classification, drug interactions, monitoring, pharmacokinetics, and physiology, pathophysiology. Those were areas that they received a red light in, so that meant that they were performing low in those categories and that they should have more practice in those areas. So you can see how that would be really helpful to the students to know where they're lacking. Now, here's another category that I use in my course, and that is the content that was on that exam. So within this cardiology exam, we talked about antiarrhythmic drugs, anticoagulants, and dyslipidemia. So this student can very, very quickly see that they did okay in anticoagulants, but there does seem to be a deficit in the other two areas. And so as they are moving forward to another exam, or maybe the final exam in this course, that student would be able to pick out pretty clearly the two areas here that they need to work on before their next exam. So the students really like these report cards, and they are usually beating down my door to release these report cards back to them so that they can see what areas they were doing well in and what areas they need to improve. So we mentioned some things with students, and definitely that feedback component is what students really like, in addition to the secure test-taking platform. But let's switch gears just a little bit, and we'll talk about the faculty member and what is in it for faculty, because they know it's probably going to take a little more time to get used to this platform. And so what's in it for them with the investment of their time? So the first thing that I would tell my faculty is that this is a secure test-taking platform, and we can trust that the student's computer is locked down, and we can trust the integrity of the items that we put on exams, because the students are not going to be able to hack the system or to get into the exam as long as we take the proper security measures to lock down the exam. The next thing that I would tell faculty is that the ExamSoft platform is very reliable when it comes to item banking. Previously, we had another type of software that did some item banking for us, but it wasn't reliable, and it didn't save the questions like we thought it was going to. And it was certainly difficult to look at the analytics to figure out which items we had used on previous exams. And so ExamSoft really does provide that reliable item banking so that you can have thousands and thousands of items within your bank that you can choose to use from year to year. And with that item banking comes some really advanced statistics with your items. And so that's really going to help the faculty member be able to make really educated decisions based on whether or not to use an item or how to edit an item before using it again on a subsequent exam. So it's a really, really robust system when it comes to looking at item statistics. I also really like the advanced scoring options, and we're going to go over each one of these that are available in the system. But as a faculty member, I have choices as far as how I want to deal with items that did not perform as well as I thought they would, or any type of question that might come up on the exam from a student, or maybe from me after I look at the item stats. I've got some flexibility in how I choose to address those issues. So we'll go through each one of those options. And then just like the students receive feedback, faculty receive feedback like never before. I'm able to see how students perform in each of those categories that I mentioned to you before. And it really helps me to know if I need to make any changes to my teaching according to how I'm seeing students perform. Because just a class average on an exam doesn't really tell me how students are performing. But if I can see a breakdown between disease state or by the different course objective or our program learning outcomes. If I see a difference in performance from students in those areas, then that's going to help me to change the way that I teach. So I receive feedback just like the students receive feedback. And then the ExamSoft platform really does give me some tools to help struggling students. Not only can I identify those students better, but I'm able to tell where they're struggling so that I can help them accordingly. And that's really important to me, not only as a teacher, but also as a director of assessment, trying to make sure that students are progressing through the curriculum correctly. This really does provide some extra tools for me to help students. And then lastly, for faculty, what's in it for them is support. They don't have to do it on their own. Not only will they have your support at their school, but they have the support of ExamSoft, and that's 24-hour support that can be reached. And so I feel like that's very helpful, and faculty should know that going in, that they're not just going to be, it's not going to be a sink or swim type situation. You're going to have support there to help you. So let's dive in a little bit deeper into some of these items, because I want to talk about the item adjustment that I mentioned. If you find an item that just didn't perform the way you thought it did, or you thought that it should, then you've got a couple of options here. So the first would be just to accept multiple answers. So maybe you truly made a mistake and there were 2 correct options on the exam. Then you can just say, not only was A correct, but B was also correct. And you can do any combination of your answer choices. But then you can also give full credit to all exam takers on that item. So let's just say it was just really bad and there really wasn't any redeeming it, then maybe you just give full credit to everyone. So that's going to leave your total point value to be the same. So if it was a 100-point exam, if you give full credit to everyone, that it will still make that exam just worth 100 points. Now that's in contrast to if you throw a question out. So that's the next option. It's going to reduce the overall points. So if that were a 5-point question and you decide just to throw it out altogether, then now instead of the exam being worth 100 points, it's only worth 95 points. So it's just going to do a little bit different with your scoring. So just something for you to be aware of on the differences between those 2 items. But the option that I often try to do, if there's an issue, now I hope there's not an issue on an exam, but if there is, and maybe an item just didn't perform the way that I would have hoped it would, then I sometimes choose to bonus the question, which means it truly curves that item. So it's going to maintain the distribution of students. So basically everyone gets credit for it. So even if you missed it, you get credit as if you got it correct. But the catch is, and the difference that it is from the items above, is that the students who got the item right to begin with, they go ahead and get credit for that item as well. So I really, really like that option because it gives the credit to the students who already got it correct, and they're able to get a few extra points for it. So I like this feature within ExamSoft, and I think it gives a lot of power to the faculty member to decide how they want to adjust items. I also really like the faculty report card that we receive, and students receive a report card, but faculty can also receive a report card. And I'm usually checking this, as soon as students start walking out of the room, I want to see what my average is. So you can see the average of a 78, your low score of a 41, which just breaks your heart, but then you see that someone made 100 and it makes you really happy. You can also see the distribution in that histogram to the right. So I like to see what the class looks like when it comes to their performance. And I also see performance on each of those categories. So if you have multiple faculty members on the same exam, you can see what the average is, the class average is. So that blue triangle there in the middle would be the class average on all of the items that are tagged with that category. And then the green dot would be the high. So some students in your class made 100 on all of those categories. And then the red would be the low. So someone in your class made that lower range when it came to all of those categories. So again, there's Bloom's taxonomy, like we saw before on the student side, but I can also see it when it comes to my course objectives, which is listed at the top there, and also my topics. So looking down on the Pharmacology 2 topics that were on that exam, you can see that heart failure is what performed the lowest as far as the class average goes. Students do seem to struggle a little bit more with that topic. So this gives me really great feedback on how students are doing in different sections of my course. Now that report is pretty and visual, but sometimes you just want to see the actual numbers. So you can run a category report. So this is under the reporting options within that exam, and you can get the actual numbers and statistics that go with each of those categories. So this would be the numbers, whereas previously we looked just at the graphical representation. So this is a good way to look and manipulate as well. You can export these numbers to Excel and then manipulate those however you would like. Another way that I like to look at my students is through a longitudinal course report. And this is a longitudinal analysis. So if you look at the very top heading, it's a black bar in the Legacy portal for ExamSoft. It will say longitudinal reports, and you can just set the dates and times and categories to report what you would like. But here, since we've talked already about Bloom's taxonomy, I wanted to show you some data. So this would be over a course, just some example data here. You can see the number of assessments. All 5 exams in this course ask questions in dimension 1, 2, and 3 of Bloom's taxonomy. And you can see how many questions were in each section. So obviously we've got a lot of dimension 1 and dimension 2 questions, but there's quite a few less dimension 3. So maybe that's something that as a course coordinator, I would talk to my faculty about, is maybe increasing the number of those critical thinking type questions. But then I can also see the class average on each of those areas. And honestly, these numbers are about what I would expect. Dimension 1 is a 79%, so they did the best on those memorization questions. And performance drops down to a 75 for dimension 3. So the harder questions are performing a little bit lower than just the rote memorization. So as you can imagine, these statistics could be really powerful to look at over the course of a semester and even year to year. You could compare cohorts of students from year to year to see how they're performing. So not only do we see the group average, which is up here in the colored box, but you can also see how each individual student is performing. So I would like to zoom in and let's look at student 1 and their performance versus student 3. And if each of these students came to my office and said, I'm not doing well in the course, I want to know what I can do better, I think that pulling this report would be really helpful to show the student how to study. Because let's look at student 1. They can memorize pretty well, but look at their dimension 3 score, that's 70%. They are not able to apply the information. So even though they can memorize it, they can't apply it to different situations. So I would make recommendations to that student on how to apply information. So study techniques that would focus more on application and not just memorization. Whereas student 3, I would talk to them differently because their issue seems to be more dimension 1 or the memorization. They seem to be able to apply some concepts, but when it comes to just some rote memorization, they're missing. And so I might talk to them more about memorization strategies and mnemonics and just different ways to actually memorize small details. So this type of report really helps me as the faculty member to help students better. So again, it's a tool that provides me to help remediate students. And then this is that same type of report, except we're looking through different things like course objectives. So I wanted to point out on monitoring here, only 4 of my 5 exams had questions about monitoring drugs, but there were only 13 items across those 4 exams. So since I'm teaching a pharmacology course, that number of 13 is really too low for me. I would want that number to be higher. So the next year I would talk to my faculty who are teaching in the course, and also myself, since I teach in it, to try to increase the amount of monitoring items that are used across the exams. But then you can also look at pharmacokinetics here. Look at the group average there of a 64. That's lower than all of the other categories. All the other categories seem to be in the high 70s or 80s, but kinetics is performing lower. And so in that case, I would try to figure out what's going wrong. Why are students struggling in that area? But it gives me a really great idea of where there might be some deficiencies and how I might change up my teaching accordingly. So these numbers definitely don't tell you what changes to make exactly, but they tell you where you might want to investigate a little bit further. So where there might be some gaps, there might be some issues with student learning, and then you as the faculty member can then investigate and figure out what's really going on. So I like these reports. And again, here's another one just broken down by course topic. And again, you can see that heart failure seems to be the one that's performing lower. And so maybe if I see this trend across several years, maybe I teach heart failure differently. I add more hours to that content, or maybe I teach it in a different way. I use more active learning and less lecture. And then what I can do is run this report on the new teaching method and see if things change, see if student performance increases after I've implemented some sort of change. So this is fantastic when it comes to publication. So we are, as faculty members, required to publish. So, why not publish some of this data that would be really helpful to other people in academia and in the just academia world at large, to know what types of changes you made to your teaching and how that affected student learning. So a lot of richness in the numbers here on these longitudinal reports. Okay, so just a few more things that I think are helpful to faculty. We mentioned the item analysis. You can find that within an exam or within an assessment. You go to report scoring and then down to item analysis, and it's very robust as far as the statistics go. And we won't get into interpretation here, but if you go to ExamSoft's website, you can see other webinars and presentations that have been given on item statistics if you want to dive in a little bit deeper into what each of those numbers mean. But the thing that I really love about the item stats is that you can look at the performance history of these items. So this is found at the very bottom of an item. So when you go into your questions tab and you just pull up any type of question that you've written, if you've used it on multiple exams, at the very bottom, you'll see this history line, this gray history line, and you'll click that little expand button right beside history, and that will expand the contents below to show you each exam that you have used this question on, how many students took it, and then how it performed. So you'll get the difficulty, but then also the discrimination index and point by serial. So this helps me as I am creating exams for next year. I can look back and see when I've used it and where performance has changed over time to make sure that it's an item that I want to use again for my upcoming exam. And then another feature that's really nice for faculty is the blueprinting feature. So you'll notice as you're building an exam, and these screenshots are all from Legacy Portal because that's what I currently use. But when you look at blueprinting, as you're building an exam, it's going to be calculating this blueprint for you. So you're going to see that 100% of the questions on this exam were tagged to my name. So I'm the only person on this exam. And then you start seeing some of those other categories that we've mentioned previously. But if you click at the bottom here, the view full blueprint, that will show you everything, because it's only going to show you in that left-hand column the most recent or the top few categories that you're using. And so if you hit to view the full blueprint, then you can expand open your category tree and figure out how many items are being used from that category and what that percentage is. You can even export this file to Excel, which I've found very helpful to run some different stats on previously. So blueprinting is something that helps me as a faculty member when I build exams to make sure that I'm not asking questions that are too easy, but I get a good mix of questions, and also that I'm not focusing on one objective or even one disease state, but that I am equally assessing everything that was covered in the course. So that's a really helpful feature. And you can, of course, export this to Excel like I mentioned before. And then the category report I find very, very helpful. So again, it's under the report and scoring tab within an exam. And you can go down to category reports, and you can do this for the entire class as a summary report, or if one student was coming to your office and just wanted to see how they were doing, you could do it by exam taker. But what I do is look at it year to year for the different categories on my exam. So this would be my 2016 category report, and I can see for Bloom's taxonomy the number of items that were in each category and then how students performed on those. But then I can also run it for 2017 and see how my exam changed and see how student performance changed across the 2 years. And then you can even take these side by side. So that would be the 2016 course objectives for my pharmacology course, and then align that with 2017 and see how student performance changes each year. So category report can be really helpful. And then I mentioned the student question feedback. So not only do students like this feature, but I love it as a faculty member. And some of you just might not know that this feature is available. But when you go to post an exam, you have the option to enable notes. And if you just click that top check mark, it basically opens up an electronic scratch pad for your students. So at the bottom of the screen that they're looking at for a question, they can type in notes to themselves and it saves. So maybe the student isn't sure about what the right answer is, and they want to type some notes to themselves and then move on to another question and come back to it a few minutes later, and they can read back over their notes and not have to walk through their entire thought process again. They can see how they narrowed down the item already and hopefully get to the correct answer at that point. But once you enable the notes feature, you can also enable the question feedback. And what that means is that as the student is typing their scratch paper, at the bottom of their screen, they can click the box that says question feedback. And what that's going to do is send that feedback to you as an instructor. So then you can run a report after the exam and see which questions the students wanted to ask you about. So I tell my students, I want you to use the scratch paper. I want you to use the notes section, but don't check the box that says give feedback to the instructor unless you really see something that I need to see. So maybe you catch a typo that you want to let me know about, or maybe you think there's really 2 right answers to that question. Go ahead and type that in the notes section and then mark it for me to see it. But I'm not going to see it unless that box is checked. And I tell my students, I don't want to read your notes to yourself. I only want to read things that could be wrong or something that you need to tell me about the exam. And so that's when the students can mark that box. Now afterwards, you can go into the report and scoring tab within an exam and get this feedback. So you can see this student asked the question. Well, let's look at the question first. It's at the top. This was a fill in the blank question. The blank diuretics are the most efficacious diuretics because they get rid of the most fluid. This student came back and said, efficacious in what way? And they kind of question, some diuretics are good because of this, others are good for this reason. So they were asking what I meant by efficacious. And it goes ahead and tells you if that student got the answer correct or not. And this student did. They did go ahead and mark loops, but I thought this student made a good point. And so I wanted to go back and change this question up, make it a little bit more clear before I use it on another exam. So for me, this is very helpful because before I release grades to the students, I can usually already figure out if there's going to be a challenge on a question. Like if I truly made a mistake and both A and B were correct, a lot of students will mark that and give me that feedback ahead of time. So when I'm reviewing the exam, I can already know, ooh, I need to look at statistics on that one. There seems to be an issue. Let me look at it and investigate it, and I'll make those changes and adjustments before I release the results to students. Because if it's truly my mistake, I want to go ahead and correct that before I release their grades and cause a lot of anxiety. So this feature I really, really love. I feel like it gives me a lot of insight before I release the grades to students. Okay, so we've looked at students, we've looked at what faculty can get out of the program, and now I want us to see the curriculum as a whole, what's in it for the curriculum. So I believe that collaborative item banking is really, really important for the curriculum because when there's multiple people teaching in a course, it's sometimes difficult to collaborate when it comes to writing test questions, but there's some features in ExamSoft that make that really easy. And we're going to look at that here in a minute. But the use of categories, like I've already shown you for the reports to students and also the reports to faculty, make it really easy for you to look at your curriculum and figure out if there are some gaps that might need to be addressed or maybe some deficiencies in student performance. So categories are really, really important for the curriculum. And I think we've already heard that there will be a webinar here in a couple of weeks talking about that. So be sure to catch that webinar as well. Those categories enable you to run longitudinal reports. And that's some of what I've shown you on the faculty side, but I'll show you what that looks like for the curriculum, because if every course is using the same types of categories, then you're able to see student performance across courses and across cohorts, across different years in the curriculum. And that's really, really important, especially for our assessment efforts. If there's other assessment people that are watching, we need to ensure that learning is similar across different cohorts, across different groups of students. And so longitudinal reports can help us do that. And then the curriculum can receive feedback like never before as well, because before ExamSoft, all of our courses were very siloed. I knew what was going on in my course, but it was because I was a coordinator for it. And we didn't really see much collaboration across courses because we all had our data and we kept it to ourselves. But now we're able to run reports so that we can see how the courses are interacting with other courses. And then you're also able, as a curriculum, to maybe capture some data that you weren't able to capture before with a paper and pencil test. So you can make scoring objective, even if the content is subjective, like a presentation or maybe an OSCE, some sort of clinical exam. We can take that, what could be very subjective, and make it objective scoring with rubrics. And so that's something that we are able to capture about the curriculum that maybe we couldn't capture before because it was living in a different system or it was on paper and pencil. So let's dig in a little bit deeper. I mentioned that collaborative item banking. When you're creating questions, you can type internal comments. So students never see this, and I'm actually going to make it a little bit bigger so that you can see this, but students never see the internal comments. So if there's multiple people teaching in a class and I want to maybe make a note to myself or maybe make a note to another faculty member who has an expertise in that area and I want them to double check what I'm saying in my question, then I can just real quickly type in a little comment, hit submit, and it will auto stamp the date, time, and my contact information so that comment stays attached to that question. So I usually think of it as a permanent sticky note because Previously, before ExamSoft, I would have all my item stats and I would have sticky notes with reminders from year to year of don't use this question next year, or be sure to change this answer choice next year. It did not perform well this year. And so I had all these sticky notes constantly, but now this is my electronic sticky pad so that I can make those comments to myself, or also make those comments to other colleagues to allow for that collaboration on items. So I figure some of you are curious as to what we require when it comes to mapping at our school. So we have each item that's tested in the college has to be linked to our competency statements, which you might call a program learning outcome. And then from our pharmacy accreditation standards, we get didactic topics. So this is Appendix 1 for those of you pharmacy people. It would be questions like biochemistry versus medicinal chemistry versus anatomy and physiology. So that's important for us to track, but then also disease states is really important because that's really helpful for the students, for them to see, oh, I did really great in anticoagulants, but I'm really lacking when it comes to antiarrhythmics. And so they can see that and know how to study accordingly. So we think that one's important, especially for feedback, but also to our curriculum as well. So we can see if there's any deficiencies across the board when it comes to disease states. And then we've already talked about the 3 levels of Bloom's taxonomy that we tag to. And then we also attach the faculty name. This just makes it easier for the faculty when they're searching for questions later if they want to pull up all the questions that have their name tagged to them. So we don't do anything with these reports, but it just makes it easier to search the database if their name is attached. So I thought you might be interested to see what we require for mapping. And then I have a couple of example curriculum mapping. I made up a couple of numbers here so that we could see what this might look like when we're looking at Bloom's taxonomy across an entire curriculum. So not just within my course, but let's see how students are performing across all courses. So at the top, you'll see the columns again are our dimensions, 1, 2, and 3. And then the green at the top would be overall. So this is accounting for all students, no matter what year they are in the program. But I also ran the report just for our first year students. So we call those P1s, or pharmacy year 1, and that's listed in orange. And then our second year P2s, and then lastly our P3s. Because I wanted you to see how you can run the reports with different dates and different students and really get a different picture of your curriculum. So overall, you can see how students are performing and how many items we are asking in each section. Again, group average starts to decline the harder the questions get. But I wanted to point out a couple of numbers to you just to look at a little bit deeper. You'll see our first year students don't seem to do very well when it comes to Dimension 3 thinking. Now they get better, thankfully. If you look down to the P2s and then the P3s, they get better in their critical thinking. And maybe that's okay. But these are the types of numbers we would like to see, that students are progressing in their ability to think critically. And then this also gives us an idea to look at the number of items that are on each assessment. So for the P2s, here, this example data has low Dimension 3 items. So maybe we want to ask more critical thinking questions to this year of students and maybe make those numbers a little bit more balanced. Again, the numbers can't tell you what to do, but the numbers can show you trends and maybe show you a red flag that's worth investigating a little bit further. So that's some curricular data when it comes to Bloom's taxonomy. Another way we could look at that are in those didactic topics. Like I mentioned before, your eyes are probably drawn to a couple of blanks that you could see. So that means that in those years of the curriculum, we don't have anything addressing that particular didactic topic. And maybe that's okay. You know, biochemistry, we don't have anything in the third year with biochemistry. And maybe that's fine. The majority of that course is in our first year. But maybe we want to reiterate that topic and bring it back up several times to students. And in that case, we might want to make a change. If we zoom into biostatistics, we can see, there aren't many questions about it in the first and second year, but when you get to the third year, there's a lot of items there. So maybe that's okay, or maybe we want maybe that to be flipped so that students learn about biostats in the first year, and then it's just reinforced throughout the second and third year. So if you're planning some type of curricular change, which I feel like everyone is in the midst of curricular change or is about to embark on some sort of curricular change. So if you were anywhere in that continuum of change, this type of reporting can be really helpful for you to see where there might be some gaps. And then once you implement change, you can look back and see if that change actually was effective and if the student performance changed in the way that you were hoping it would change. And then for rubrics, we mentioned that objective scoring as being a plus to the curriculum because you're able to capture some data that you might not have been able to capture before. So when it comes to faculty using rubrics, you can definitely have more objective scoring on that subjective content, and it really is easy grading, and you can ensure consistency when you're using that same rubric across each student. But then I would also propose that you think about using peer review with rubrics and that you have students grade each other's works. Now, I know this isn't in every single class, but when you can, it really does help students to think at a deeper level and really learn how to assess other people, and they really learn in the process. And so if you're able, then this is another tool that can help your students develop. So that brings us to the end of the presentation, and please be typing in questions if you can in the chat box. But I wanted to wrap up with this quote that says, "Change is the end result of all true learning." And even though change is really difficult, when we are learning, then we've got to implement change. And that's honestly what I feel like ExamSoft does for our curriculum, is it helps us to assess, but it gives us that feedback. And if you notice, feedback was in the student benefits, the faculty benefits, and the curriculum benefits. It's feedback like we've never seen before in each of those areas. So we're able to assess, but then we're able to get some feedback. And then once we get that feedback, it's just going to lead to more change. We're going to change the way we're teaching. We're going to change the way that we're asking questions so that hopefully we continue to get better. And so I hope this has been helpful today to look at the different angles of assessment and feedback when it comes to students, faculty, and the curriculum. And I'm happy to take a couple of questions. And this is my contact information. If you would like to email me to talk a little bit more, I'm always happy to share and collaborate. So thank you for attending the presentation. And Mitch, I'm going to take some questions from you if there's any that are present.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Ashley. We really appreciate it. Let's just hang on one sec. Okay, so like Dr. Castleberry said, we're going to go ahead and start the Q&A portion of the webinar. So as a reminder, like she said, if you have any specific questions, go ahead and start typing them into the Zoom bar now. And it looks like we have one already. So the first question is, Dr. Castleberry, is do you use ExamSoft for standardized patient scoring / rubric, or is Learning Space your program and rubric assessment for standardized patients?
So Learning Space is what our system uses. So like in our campus, we have Learning Space. So that's what our SPs or standardized participants are used for learning. And so we currently use MEDI or Learning Space to capture that because that's what our standardized participants are used to doing. Now that data can be transformed and put into ExamSoft so that your curriculum is still capturing that data. So it is possible to move that over. It will just take a little bit of manipulation to get it from one system into ExamSoft.
Okay, perfect. Here's another question. In your experience, Ashley, did any of your students struggle to fully understand use and apply the information from the Strengths and Opportunity report?
Yes, absolutely. And that's a great question. I feel like when students first asked questions, I thought, wait, it's all so clear. It's right here, red, yellow, and green. And they could identify based on the colors what was wrong, but they didn't always know how to fix it. And so that's where I felt like I spent a lot of time with students in my office is when we could identify the issue with this report, then I would help them to determine the plan as far as studying or changing habits to actually help them improve in that area. But absolutely, they definitely struggle. You're not alone there if your students don't know those next steps either. But I think that's where we come in as faculty to really help them determine a plan and figure out how to get better in that area. If you're seeing some major trends in students, I think it might be worth creating a video or some sort of module to tell students, if you are struggling in dimension 1, for example, if you do Bloom's taxonomy and you say dimension 1 is where you're lacking, here are some resources for you, and provide that to them so it can help them with that next step. Once they figure out what's going wrong with the reports, you provide that extra piece of information to give them their next steps on what they should do next.
Okay, that's awesome. This next question kind of goes along with that. Did you provide your students with any training on ExamSoft software? And if so, what did the training outline look like?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I've given a webinar on this, so we might be able to go through some of the archives and find some of the things that we've done to help the students. But we did just a fun quiz for the students initially to help them just figure out how to use the software. So get it downloaded and then take the quiz. It was just a fun, pop culture type quiz. But then we also created another quiz for the students to do it as a practice exam, and they could take it as many times as they wanted to. But this exam had specific things that they had to use within the software and would walk them toward how to find the answer. For instance, we would ask them, what's the square root of 1,691, whatever. Well, then in parentheses, we would say, to access the calculator, click on the blank icon located on the left-hand side of your screen. We walked them through how to do it. Or maybe for an attachment, we would say, who is the award-winning artist featured in the attachment? To access the attachment, click on and we give them the instructions to find it. And so we do that quiz and actually open it up every semester for students, because sometimes students get new devices and they need to download the software and just make sure that it's working. And so that how to use ExamSoft quiz is something that we open up each semester just so that students can go in there and play with the features as many times as they would want. So our session with the students really involves them downloading the software, taking the fun quiz, and then giving them access to a practice quiz every single semester so that they can practice if they need to.
Okay, that sounds awesome. Next, we have a question about specific curriculum adjustments. Could you provide some of the examples of specific curriculum adjustments you've made due to the longitudinal assessment data that you aggregated?
Yeah, so I won't say anything specific with our school. We definitely are going through a type of curricular change and figuring out what types of changes that we need to make. But some of the examples, like I mentioned, that could be used, I think, would be where there might be some gaps in your curriculum. Like you think that you spend, let's say 100 hours on hypertension, a specific disease state, but then you look and see that you only ask across the entire curriculum 20 questions with hypertension. Well, that doesn't really align with the time that you're spending on that topic and what you're assessing in that topic. And so therefore, I think that would warrant a little bit more of an in-depth look at that disease state and how you are teaching that across courses and how students are performing in it. So I think it's really important, and this is what we're in the process of doing, is aligning this curriculum data with our curriculum map. Because again, we know where we're teaching content, we know how many hours we spend on that content, what type of learning methods we're using, like lecture or active learning or team-based learning, but using that right beside the ExamSoft data so that we can see if it aligns. And if what we say we're teaching is what we're actually testing on, and then to draw that out even further, how students are performing in that area. So when it comes to curricular change, something that we'll do after the curriculum is to run these reports again and to see if our changes are actually doing something, if student performance is changing based on them. So maybe it's a different teaching method that you want to see the differences across semesters, or maybe it's the order that you do different content in, and see if students get it better if it's in a different order. But I feel like the questions are endless here, is what you could ask. But just by running these longitudinal reports on a few categories, it's going to give you an idea of where student performance might be low, but then also where your item number might not match the amount of time that you spend on it in the classroom. So I think alignment here with your curriculum map is really important, and would be where I would start if you're starting to run these reports. And let me also say that these categories are retroactive. So if you wanted, you think of something new that you want to see, I wonder if there's any change in this over the last couple of years, you can go back and tag questions with those new categories and run the reports again. So it's not like you had to have the items tagged before they were used on an exam. So really the sky's the limit here as far as ideas of what types of questions you could ask of the data.
Okay, well, that was kind of like a little bit of a loaded question, huh? So I have one last question, and then we'll make this our last question. What were some of the biggest challenges that you feel like your faculty and your peers faced when first implementing ExamSoft?
You know, I think some of the challenges are just learning a new software. It's different, even though ExamSoft is very intuitive and user-friendly. It's just a new software, and it seems like we have to learn a new software every year with our jobs as faculty members. So I think that was the biggest hurdle, was just getting over the need for the software. And so something that I tried to do for our faculty is to show the benefit of it, like to show what these reports could be, to show how the students can get feedback like never before, so that they can see the benefit of it. And then it makes it worth the extra work or the extra time that it takes initially. So I think that was the biggest hurdle initially. And so we wanted to just get in some exams, make sure that we're comfortable with the software. And then it really wasn't until our second and third years that we really started tagging the questions and using that longitudinal data for change. So initially, just make sure that faculty can put in their questions and get the exams. But then as you're comfortable with that, adding in the categories is where you're really going to get a big return on your investment. So I think those would be our biggest hurdles and how we tried to overcome those.
Okay, perfect. So that's going to be the last question, and that's going to conclude our webinar. Just to remind you all, PDF links to the slide deck and a copy of the recording is going to be sent in about 24 hours. And I would really like to thank you all for attending. There's one last reminder I would like to let you guys know. This is a good time to mention that the innovator pricing for our 4th annual ExamSoft Assessment Conference in Fort Lauderdale is actually ending at the end of the month. So you can actually, if you're planning on attending EAC, I really recommend going ahead and signing up for registering now, because you'll save $100 by registering before January 31st. And along with that too, kind of exactly what Dr. Castleberry did in this webinar, CFP submissions for the event are actually going to open tomorrow. And the assessment field really needs thought leaders like Dr. Castleberry and yourselves, who can move and inspire educators with innovative ideas about assessment, and then turn these ideas into reality and show how to replicate your success using ExamSoft software. Very similar to exactly what Ashley Castleberry was talking about in today's webinar. The topic tracks that are going to be presented at EAC, just a little bit of information, is assessment data analytics use, promoting student engagement through assessment, rubrics and subjective assessment processes, assessment advances within a specific educational discipline, advanced use of ExamSoft tools, and the ExamSoft new portal use. So like I said before, if you're interested in presenting in any of these following areas, just go ahead and look for this CFP submission email that we're going to be sending out tomorrow, or you can check out our social media, so Twitter, LinkedIn, Google+, and Facebook for the link to the CFP submission page, or you can just go to assessmentconference.com, where the registration page is tomorrow, and look for the CFP link. But we really can't wait to hear from you. And lastly, I would just really like to thank Dr. Ashley Castleberry again for this great, fantastic webinar. And if you have any questions for ExamSoft, you can just email us at info@examsoft.com. And with that, I really hope you guys enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much.